This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Khanam.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, today's show is going to focus on the amazing, transformative, and really frightening and exciting time in Syria right now. The Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad has, as we reported last week, has been defeated. The 50-year rule of the Assad family has come to an end. A new regime has taken over, and things are in flux right now. What we know immediately is that Antony Blinken and a number of so-called Arab leaders have been meeting in Jordan or met in Jordan and are in communication with the new leadership in Syria, discussing how to go forward. We're going to be talking about what really happened in Syria. What does it mean for the Assad regime for the future? Its implications for Russia, Iran, Turkey, and of course the Israelis. The map of the Middle East, Jamal, has completely changed in terms of the geopolitics. We're going to talk about that today. But before we get to that, Jamal, we have been able to secure, through your contacts, an interview with a Syrian academic here in the United States. Dr. Mohja Kahf is a poet, scholar, professor of English at the University of Arkansas. She was born in Damascus, grew up in the Midwest. She talks about her hopes, aspirations, and the future for Syria and the Syrian people and the return to their homeland. The idea is to establish a democratic state for the future. It's a really amazing interview. It's very difficult to get interviews with Syrians on Western media. So this is a very important interview, Jamal.
Well, everybody is commenting about what's going on in Syria except for the Syrians themselves on CNN and et cetera. Or if they just send a reporter, it's just like put an act and they really don't understand the full picture. And this interview gives you a glimpse at the full picture, and you've said something very important, Jess, which is Syria is in a time of influx. I mean, so we cannot really predict one way or another how it's going to develop, but it's a transitional government for the time being. Let's watch the interview. In just over a week, rebel forces seized much of Syria's northwest. First, they captured Syria's largest city, Aleppo, then Hama and Homs. On Sunday, December 8, they entered Syria's capital, Damascus, taking the city without a fight as government forces fled. Assad's government kept rebel forces at bay for more than a decade with Iranian and Russian military support, but it collapsed with astonishing speed over the last week. The main rebel group behind Assad's ouster is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, whose name means Organization for the Liberation of the Levant, led by the Nusra Front founder Abu Muhammad al-Julani, aka Ahmed Hussein al-Shara, who previously was associated with Al-Qaeda and ISIS and spent several years in an American prison in Iraq. Joining us to help understand all of this is Dr. Mohja Kahf. She's a poet, a scholar, and professor of English at the University of Arkansas. She was born in Damascus and grew up in the Midwest. Welcome to Arab Talk, Mohja.
شكرا سباس بالكردي.
Okay. Take us back to the Assad regime, the father, then the son, and how was the rule in Syria?
We've been under martial law since 1963. When Assad came to power, he also put in prison the other members of another branch of the Ba'ath that wanted to be democratic. It's been a rule of incredible repression, no freedom of speech, no rule of law, extreme brutalization. And in 2005, there was a historic moment when different opposition, Kurdish, communist and Islamist type opposition came together in writing the Damascus Declaration. All of the signatories to it were hounded down and hunted down and imprisoned and brutalized. That were all of the signatories that were accessible inside Syria. So, and then Kurds in Syria have been dispossessed since 1963. They are indigenous to the area. In fact, more indigenous, can we say, than other population. I mean, they were there before the Arabs, if I may just say that. I'm Arab, but I'm an advocate for Kurds as well. So they were brutalized, taken off of their indigenous homelands, and those lands given to Arabs brought from different parts of Syria. Bedouins resettled in what the Ba'ath Party called the Arab Belt. So many oppressions, and by 2011, Syrians had it. In 2011, in Dar'a, thousands of people took to the streets on March 18th. And then unexpectedly, in towns and little small villages that you never heard of, you know, in Inkhil, in Bayda, in small Daraya, people went out into the streets protesting. And they said things like, Sunniye wa Alawiye, kullo biddo hirriye. And they said things like, Islam wa Masihiyye, bidna dawle wataniye. And then that was brutalized.
You have to translate this because most of our audience won't understand.
You could put a translation under later?
Well, basically, they wanted unity between Arabs, Kurds, Muslims, Christians, and they wanted freedom. I'm just paraphrasing here.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, is it surprising that Bashar al-Assad's rule collapsed so quickly? It felt like a house of cards with hardly any resistance. Then he fled to Russia without even addressing the Syrian public. Was this a long time in the making?
You know what? I'm a poet. And so my strength is in imagining and not, you know, I don't really see my role as figuring out the politics. I have been listening nonstop, round the clock for over a week to everything. And from what from the political analysts that I have listened to, there is a convergence of things that somehow, I mean, why did they not, if they were going, you know, if Assad was going to fall, wouldn't it have been amazing if he had fallen when 400,000 people, Christians and Kurds and Arabs, filled Clock Tower Square in Hama in July 2011. And when 480 at one point, local councils began teaching themselves self-governance, again, all in 2011, before anybody went down the militarization path. Because once you go down the militarization path, there is funding involved. And then people are putting their hands into Syria and trying to decide for them. But to those people who think that this was, you know, something that was somehow decided by the CIA, I would ask them to think about whether those 400,000 people in Clock Tower Square in Hama, masalan, in 2011, do you really think that they sat down and had coffee with the CIA or were misled by people who did? They were erupting out of being treated without human dignity. And so, you know, we all know, I mean, do we need to, the convergence of things that made, you know, Iran depleted and distracted, Russia depleted and distracted, Turkey having its own agenda, wanting to push back or crush the Kurds that it considers related to a movement inside Turkey that it considers terrorist. All of this is happening. But it did, I think, take people by surprise. It did even take Israel by surprise. It did even take the US by surprise. It took Syrians by surprise. It took Turkey by surprise. I mean, not the initial, sweep into Aleppo, but the fact that it wasn't pushed back by the regime after that, the fact that it managed on from Aleppo.
Well, you've mentioned what people were chanting in 2011, and it talks about really secularism. But now with the background of now it's going to be the new Syrian government, or the new Syrian government in the making, and many of them are labeled as Islamist. Will there be a threat to the... Okay, well, will there be a threat to the plurality of the Syrian society that you were talking about? The Christians, the Kurds, the Druze, even the minority now, the Alawites, are they going to be hunted down because they supported Assad? Or, maybe the Syria in your dreams of maybe the poets dream to have a secular state where everyone can live under democracy.
So I do want to talk about what we fantasize about. I want us to be able to envision it and imagine it. Is that what's going to play out? Is another question, is a big question. But when a tyrant falls, when a tyrant is toppled, you do get a moment to celebrate with those who have suffered from his tyranny. And you get to worry with them about what happens next. And I, as a feminist and as a part of a Syrian women's political movement, which is full of Syrian feminists, both inside and outside of Syrian land right now, you worry about what's going to happen next. You sob for those who did not make it to live the tyrant, to see the tyrant fall. And you rage against those who take advantage of the ensuing moment, and you fear for their victims. So we have noted, people have talked about how relatively, think about Libya, masalan, how relatively not bloody this has been after 14 very many bloody years. And I'm not saying that to be an apologist for these HTS, these Hayya people, and the 50, different factions under them that they don't always control. But to rejoice at the downfall of Assad as queer Palestinian American community organizer and performer Mama Ghanoush says is what is required for our collective liberation. And as my friend Lana Barqawi, the editor of Mizna, said, the people are in solidarity with the people. And in fact, one of the reasons why one can be worried about the creation about will this really lead after 18 months, which even 18 months is an alarming prospect, right, to have these people be in power. Will it really lead to a secular, sovereign, independent, self-sufficient Syrian state? I mean, eventually self-sufficient Syrian state. One of the reasons to doubt that is that if it was a democratic Syria where it was truly representative, people would be, and parliament and the state would be looking for ways to support the liberation of Palestinians. And so is that really going to be allowed to develop, or are we going to be, pushed and prodded and egged into it continuing to be a mess for an extended period? People have brought up the Libya scenario. People have brought up the Iraq scenario, among various sort of different, going from worst case to slightly better case to sort of best case scenarios, which the examples of Turkey and the examples of Dubai. One person even said in 5 years, Syria is going to be Dubai. That was sort of the positive example for them. It's very capitalism ridden, and that's not my fantasy, the positive fantasy. But bear in mind that it wasn't as bloody as Libya. Bear in mind also an important difference from Iraq, because there were no foreign imperialist troops on the ground doing this.
Well, some
that's a big
might doubt this because the Americans are there, Russians are there, Iranians are there.
U.S. troops are in the southeast.
Yeah.
Dealing with.
Well, what about Israel? Israel now
and
taking this.
This right? Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
What I said, what about Israel now just basically grabbing land in the south and this was, or putting, according to them, a buffer zone above an already existing buffer zone, bombing Syria more than 500 times within the past few days, destroying all its military, all its assets and so forth. And everybody is silent about it, including...
Do you know that their bombing is not just...
Including the rebels, they're not going back into condemning or defending their country, the land they want to claim that it is their country. I mean, how does this make you feel?
This makes me feel alarmed. And do you know that Israel is bombing not only in that area, that so-called buffer zone, which is sovereign Syrian soil, which the entire, of course, Jolan is, but their bombing has reaches into, what, and I mean, I need to double check some of this. There's information coming in so fast, so there's some of this that I haven't had a chance to go in and check for different credible sources. But the bombing is over Damascus, Homs, Halab. It's not just in that so-called buffer zone, which again is sovereign Syrian soil. So, what we want to see emerge in Syria and what we're doing, everyone that cares about Syria, every Syrian that cares about Syria and wants to be involved is doing in whatever majal they have is to try to, people are putting out petitions to be sent to this government. People are organizing as journalists, as feminists in every way possible. If I may fantasize about as a poet or use the imagination, a pluralistic, democratic, sovereign, and that's dealing with the issue that there are at least five different foreign incursions on Syrian soil, Russian, Iranian, American, Israel, and Turkey. And from the beginning in 2011, which lest Syrians or anybody else forget, the final removal of Assad, and I don't say liberation because we have not yet reached liberty, right? That requires guarantees of liberty. But the removal of Assad would not have been possible without that 2011 movement, uprising, which demanded no foreign military intervention, no foreign boots on the floor, on the ground in Syria, or their money guiding it. That was one of the initial three no's: no to violence, no to the regime, and no to foreign military intervention. And there are regions like Sweda, which is being self-governed now. Sweda and Daraa are self-governing. They're not really under the power of HTS yet. They still, what I hear from women organizers in Sweda is, we don't want anybody's investment in us. We want to be self-sufficient. We want to grow what we eat and weave what we wear. And and may I add to that list of pluralistic, democratic, sovereign, secular state with full gender equality. With full gender equality. For all genders, may I add. For all genders. And economically self-sufficient. And obviously, this is not going to happen overnight, but other things that we do want on a more immediate level is an immediate end to the fighting between Turkish-backed SNA, Syrian National Army, and Kurdish SDF. Kurdish event, for things for other immediate things, no roving armed factions. All of them need to be dissolved and adhere to a disciplined, truly national army that is loyal to the Constitution, which we don't yet have, but that is loyal to the principles of a democratic, sovereign Syria, and takes no bribes and would defend us against such Israeli incursions. A constitution that would allow no political prisoners, that mandates freedom of opinion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and full equality, that mandates full equality for people of all genders. So, and a just and transparent rule of law. I think that's what people have been just wanting, is just a just rule of law with an independent judiciary that's not bribed, that civilians don't get sent to military courts. People are also really, intellectuals, artists, writers, journalists, they want technocrats for leaders. They don't want charismatic leaders. They want people who will come in, do their job, and transition out of power.
What's the role of Syrians in the diaspora? Since now you've mentioned intellectuals, because I know many of them are outside of Syria, or sadly, some of them were in jails or killed by the regime. I mean, what's the role? Almost like half the population of Syria is now dispersed, whether internally or externally. Do you think now that they will be encouraged to return and kind of have a role in forming the new Syria of your dreams?
Everybody's talking about return. I mean, I don't know anybody who isn't talking about return. Those who aren't are at least talking about going for a visit. And when they do visit, are thinking about how to visit ethically. And I do want any Syrians who are thinking about visiting, in the summer and so on, to have this not just be a vacation, but to find a way, bring books with you, and talk to people about what they need, talk to organizations, Syrian organizations on the ground there about what they need. Is it medicine? Is it school books, and so on? So the role of, I just got off viewing a group of Syrian women journalists, and many of them having been pushed into exile. I mean, I myself, born in Syria, but have experienced, I'm a third generation of exile. So their role is to push for all of this. And I think there is no question that for those who hold the pen or the paintbrush, that is what they want for those Syrians. Unfortunately, they are not the ones who hold the gun. So it is our job to convince those who hold the gun that we need to move toward this. My motto for all of that, and it comes with a bittersweet kind of hope against hope. I can't believe I even said the word hope as a Syrian, having been disappointed and crushed so many times thus far. It is a bit much to ask us to actually hope that this happens, but we need, even with withholding that sense of being able to hope, but we can still work for it. As if we hope, we can still work for it. And my sort of inspirational motto for that is Razan Zaytoune for president.
Well,
Hoping against hope that she is found, that she is found alive, and she would, be the president of such an imagined Syria.
You've mentioned people who are holding the gun, and those are the ones who took over now Damascus. Do you have, and I know you don't like to use the word hope, do you have any hope that they will give away the gun and transition to this autocratic state? And for what we know about them, for example,
This autocratic state, or democratic state?
Well, no, I meant democratic state, but in essence, what I wanted to say, technocrats. That's the word I was looking for. I made a mistake with that, but that they hand it over to technocrats. And especially from what we know about Julani and his group, I mean, now he's kind of stopped wearing al-amama and is in a military fatigue. And I wouldn't be surprised a couple of weeks from now, maybe he'll be in a suit and a tie. Will you accept him?
You know what? Will he release the political prisoners that they hold in Idlib? They're releasing the political prisoners in Sweda, but how about their own political prisoners? That might be a gesture that they are moving to really upholding freedom of opinion and freedom of speech. Show me. That's my reply to that.
Well, I have a
anyone
quote.
who
I
wants
have a
me
quote
to
here
believe
from
that he's changed. Show me.
Well, the spokesman for the so-called transitional government vowed to dissolve Assad's security forces and shut down his notorious prisons, including Sednaya, which has been described as a human slaughterhouse. I mean, this is what they say.
But I'm saying, what about their prisons in Idlib? Right? Those are the ones that I want to see also opened. How are they going to yudubtu those people among the 50 factions that are supposedly under their umbrella who are committing violations, who are dragging, doing mob vengeance on individuals who they consider responsible for massacres and tortures, right, in the coastal areas, and these are being targeted, those people are Alawite that they're targeting and dragging, many of them. So instead of having them before the court of Syrians, before a serious court, so that they can meet their accusers and a sense of truth and a sense of justice can be achieved for Syrians, this mob violence is happening in, like, I started counting them last night. And again, these videos are all needing verification and so on, and things are coming in so fast. But there are incidences. There are about 19, I counted, incidences, which is, yes, one can say that's a small number for something so big to have happened. But let's make it get smaller. And if you don't speak up about a small number, it can rise to a large number.
Well, I mean, as you know, every revolution, sadly, going, I'm citing maybe the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror and so forth. I mean, that's kind of the biggest fear. But people are demanding accountability. What's next, for example, for the Assad and his family? Shouldn't he brought to justice, if not for committing all the crimes against the Syrian people, perhaps for embezzling billions of dollars of Syria's wealth and taking it with him or investing it in Russia? I mean, is that something you think should be focused on, or this is something for later and to kind of call for what you mentioned, musalaha, or forgiveness and just focusing on establishing a democratic country?
I mean, I think that we can take models in South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Councils, in Rwanda's models of rebuilding together. But I would who would not like to see Bashar al-Assad brought to justice and face specific, the accusations of the people that he has harmed and tortured and massacred for so many years. I heard a report from a woman from Salamiya that they were so happy that he was gone, and it was just those hours before the confirmed, reports of the plane going to Russia and so on. And they ran out. It was a few hours before, and people ran out into the town squares and celebrated. and regime forces fired on them and then abandoned their posts and left. To the last minute, Yani. And then reports about, the bodies of prisoners that were in the morgue that the poor families were identifying yesterday, those bodies were still soft. Do you know? So, I mean, till the last minute, that suffering, and yeah, there should be an accounting for that.
Are you worried that Syria might not remain intact? We know that there are Turkish ambition, let's call it softly, that in parts of Syria. I saw recently a video, I cannot confirm the source, but it's Druze leader suggesting to join their brethren in the occupied Golan Heights, i.e. become part of Israel. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, if you know anything about Sueda, that's not going to happen, right? Anyone who knows anything about Sueda. I mean, even Majd al-Shams was demonstrating with us against Assad. They sent videos and solidarity back in the day in 2011. And we know that is no. So I do have fears. Who doesn't have fears about that? So there are, as I said, again, a spectrum of scenarios. And I had started to say that we do, I don't know if, like, you can say Libya, Iraq, Yemen, and so on I wonder if Syria is going to be a fourth or a fifth model of what can happen, because there are very big differences from Libya. We did not have NATO doing this for us via airstrikes. We did not from Libya. And then we did not have the sort of bloody vengeance aftermath. Those are two big differences. In Iraq, the differences are, again, we did not have America come in with troops on the ground and do this for us. Syrians did this and took the U.S. by surprise. We also did not have a dissolution of the institutions of the state. The opposition, the people of the pen and the people of the sword were kind of united in regarding those institutions as something that belongs to the Syrian people and is part of the national treasury that needs to serve the Syrian people and so should not be harmed. They did allow them to trash Bashar's personal house, and it became like a tourist, like people were walking in with their families and their little kids by the hand and taking pictures and videos as they sort of opened the notebooks and in the kitchen staff and the Magdous jars and things like this and walking away with, silly thing. And I think that's fine if, trashing a few of those like isolated things like Assad's tomb or the burning that they did there. I mean, I'm not endorsing any kind of disrespect to graves, but I can, as a vent that I cannot imagine, I can imagine much more harmful ways to vent. And so, when my cousin sends me a video of the celebrations in Damascus and she and her, women friends are out there, amid many other women and with and without hijab, dancing and singing, it makes, it offers a little bit of reassurance, but also these are early days, these things can change. It offers a little bit of reassurance for the intense worry that I was feeling about this, seeing these guys who took over walking around on the streets in the videos, in the earliest videos. So yes, now women are out, but that means something, but it doesn't mean everything substantive. That also needs to be. And I have heard at least one case, not in Damascus area, but in another province in, I think, Homs, where a woman was stopped at a checkpoint for going out on a date. And she was told, no, you're not married. You can't go out on this date. Personal liberties. freedoms, freedom of choice, freedom of the individual, women's freedoms, gendered freedoms. It was one case. And again, these things are difficult at this stage to completely verify. But yeah, that is something I'm very much keeping an eye on.
People, of course, now talk about what's happening, the rebels, the leader, the Assad family. But we know in 2011, there were other players, those people who demonstrated peacefully, demanding hurriya, demanding their freedom. And recently, the corpse of Mazen al-Hamada, who was imprisoned since 2020 by the Assad regime, was found in a hospital. I guess he was lured back into Syria. And then after speaking out against the Syrian government during the civil war, how will he and others be remembered? I said, aside from the militarized now rebels, I mean, in comparison to the early revolutionists.
A lot of people have died along the way, and it's heartbreaking that they've died just so close to seeing an end to this stage of Syria. Another one is Hevrin Khalaf, who was killed by, again, some of these forces that Turkey is egging on in the north, the Syrian National Army. Hevrin Khalaf was a leader in the Future Syria Party and was one of the part of that protest movement in the Kurdish, Kurdish area. Was a Kurdish woman. We lost so many, both in the early days and even along the way. And there is still hope. There are still 100. I think the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights estimates 105,000 political prisoners yet unaccounted for. So what does that mean? Where are they? And what I want to see is I want to see DNA identification for all in mass graves. And I want to see marked graves for all who were killed. I want to be able to visit their graves. And a lot of them were just buried under mounds that they put jasmine to grow on. So I want their deaths recorded and treated with dignity.
Before you go, you have a poet for our listeners.
I do, but there was one more topic I wonder if we just have a minute to get to.
Yes, we do.
I wanted to say especially to Palestinians watching this, I wanted to say a couple of things. Number one, I love you and you know it. And every Syrian you have ever known loves the Palestinian struggle and you know it. And we will continue loving your cause because it is a righteous cause. No matter whether you return solidarity to us, right? It's not transactional for us, for me as a Syrian. And I wanted to say, think abundancy and try to release from a scarcity mentality about Syrian support for Palestine. Release from their suffering under Assad. Syrians will figure out a way to support Palestine's struggle for freedom and independence from the Zionist entities' colonization and brutalization, a way that is way more meaningful than an arms corridor, right? Palestinians have been through so much deprivation, and I know it's a lot to ask Palestinians not to hold a scarcity mentality, but please be open to abundance thinking about this. We love you. I wanted to say that. And then I have a poem that I wrote actually many years ago that I could not imagine entering an era post-Assad. Really, after a certain point, after I think 2014, 2015, 2016, I sort of did not imagine this happening until way late in my life, if not my children's life. I had resigned myself to never cutting my hair again. You know, in 2012, when I still had hope, Naderet, I made a vow that I would not cut my hair until Assad was gone from Syria. I want you to see this. So on Sunday, with Palestinian friends as witnesses, I hacked off part of my hair finally. And the rest is still long because I still haven't had time to go to a salon or to get it cut properly. Anyway, this is called an exile return fantasy. You will sell the house in America, fill with books, a truck in New Syria, drive it first to Daraa province, lending out books, trusting the children. Put bells on it to lure them to reading. Go to each little protest village, Inkhil, Sanameh, Namar. Dots on the map in your exile brain, blooming into town squares full of people. Suwaida, Salamiya, Saraqib, Hasake, Kafrindal. You will not know the village idioms. Your feet in their cells will know the road, though the regime pushed you off it long ago. Locals will roll their eyes at the gaps in your knowledge of the land, roll with their mockery, kneel and sob at every jasmine mound. Maybe it happens like this. Maybe you're in your 90s. The world's been changing. You haven't kept up. The phone rings. Your gray-haired child says, "Mom, it's time for that bookmobile run. Palestine is free and so is Syria. It's time."
Very emotional. Dr. Mohja Kahf, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on Arab Talk.
Thank you for having me.
That's the voice and the face of Dr. Mohja Kahf. She's a poet, scholar, and professor of English at the University of Arkansas, and born in Syria, raised in the Midwest. And Jamal, I have to say, probably among the most compelling interviews in Western media. I mean, this is a major thing that you were able to get her, Jamal, because as you said, we have not heard from the Syrian community here in the United States about dreams, hopes, and aspirations. And the future, I mean, I know a lot of Syrians have that little bit of hope and excitement, but there's also a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen.
Well, there is a lot of anxiety. I mean, aside from the celebration, let's put it this way. If you talk to, let's say, 10 Syrians, I'm sure 9 or 10 of them will tell you that they're relieved and happy to see the end of the Assad regime. They remained basically in silence for many years, especially those who had families there, because you couldn't criticize the regime. We know what's going on in Syrian jails, what happened to the opposition, and so forth. However, you have, I don't know what is it, a renaissance, I want to call it, or I don't know what, but the leader of the opposition now, you know, he was a member of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. He was a member of ISIS. He established the Nusra Front in Syria, and I've actually said it kiddingly the other day during the interview, and I said, you know, first he was wearing, you know, his head covering the amama and, you know,
Right.
the kind of Al-Qaeda look, the Islamist, and then when he went into Damascus, he was wearing his military fatigue, and soon he'll be in a tie and a suit. And well, recently he was in a Western jacket attire and a shirt, not a tie, but you know, that's the transition that we are seeing. And I'm sure if he accepts the demands of the United States or he's willing to play along, the United States will recognize Syria and will recognize his rule and will take him off the wanted list, because he has been on the wanted list for many years. I think there was a reward of $10 million for
Right.
his head. So this is the time that we are seeing now. I see a lot of jubilant Syrians in the streets. They're you know, celebrating. I've seen a lot of families getting united, especially those who had loved ones in Assad's jails. But there are, some cautious, I would say. Assad, you have to be cautiously optimistic to what is going to happen to Syria. But as we've mentioned, Jess, you have now several players, and as we say in Arabic, when the cow falls, people with
The knives come out.
knives that come out of the woodwork. Everyone is trying to get a piece out of that cow. And I think this is the fear, this is the anxiety, this is what makes me anxious, and this is what probably makes every Syrian anxious. What do the Israelis want? Well, we've seen what the Israelis have done. They've already taken 26, they're inside Syria, at least 26 miles inside of Syria, okay, creating a buffer zone on top of another buffer zone. And they've had more than 500 bombings. They've bombed the Syrian military sites and so forth. Turkey did its own bombing also. And it has its eye on a chunk of Syria. What do the Russians want? The Iranians? The Americans?
Well, I have a little bit to say about that, Jamal. The Russians have been reported to have been pulling out some of their military already. We know that. The Iranians pulled out before the fall of Damascus because they saw it coming. But one thing I want to point out in terms of the geopolitics of it, the route between Iran to Lebanon to replenish and supply Hezbollah, that route through Syria, guess what? It's cut. And no longer is there a connection, I would say an easy connection between Iran and Lebanon right now to Hezbollah. So that whole dynamic of the Hezbollah, Iranian, Syrian axis, that has completely changed. That's a huge dynamic. And for Antony Blinken to actually speak with a former member, and the United States to speak with a former member of Al-Qaeda or ISIS, Jamal, that's kind of a big change right now, right? Speaking of the knives coming out after the cow dies, we shall see, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have to I don't want to, talk in cliche and categorize it in winners and losers, because hopefully the winners will be the Syrian people.
That's the hope.
I don't want to see any winners, external winners, let's say, per se. However, we have to keep an eye on this. I, for the time being, seeing Erdogan is the biggest winner. Turkey eventually will kind of advance itself and to be the winner. Number one, it supported the Syrian rebels for many years. It has a direct line, direct connection. It had more than 3 million. It still has more than 3 million Syrians living there, and is eager to kind of repatriate them back. And it had great relationships with Syria for many years until 2011, really. So I think Erdogan is positioning himself to be basically just on a geopolitical front to be, I mean he's now actually the go-between. Even the United States has to go through Erdogan, whatever. He's the mediator, believe it or not. He's the one that's calling the shots. Israel, we know what Israel wants. Territory. Land grab, control. I mean, there's nothing good going to come out of Israel, and that's a word of caution to the Syrians. I mean, it's a whole different thing. Maybe Turkey is looking for commercial relationship, is looking, maybe eyeing the Syrian oil, but definitely Israel is 100% looking for expansion. And that's the biggest fear. Iran, Russia are the losers.
Big loser.
All these years that they've invested in Syria, well, Iran invested in Syria because it was investing in Hezbollah, and actually that's what weakened Hezbollah for protecting Assad for many years.
That's right.
And sending some of its elite forces to protect the Assad regime. And Russia basically is out of the Middle East, had one stronghold, which is in Tartus, to have a naval base. I don't know what's going to happen with that. They are negotiating to maintain that naval base. We don't know, but that's their interest. And at the end of the day, I would say 100% the reason that the Assad regime collapsed like a deck of cards, house of cards, is because Russia threw him under the bus, and then Iran followed suit. They had no use for him
Right.
anymore.
Right.
And, you know, there are all kinds of stories and rumors and innuendos about what happened the last 24 hours, that he just like that disappeared and left and so forth without even addressing the Syrian public. But I think he knew that if he stayed in the country, it was
He would
all
be
over
dead.
for him and his family. And the Russians basically threw him under the bus. They just offered him an exile. You could come to the country, we'll help you come to the country. And that's the end. So
One quick thing before we sign off, Jamal. There is an immediate search for the billions of dollars that Bashar al-Assad has been hiding for many, many years, decades, that have been, billions of dollars of Syrian money that's been taken by the Assad regime. And the last thing I just want to comment on briefly, Jamal, which is a sad story, is really Sednaya prison, the kind of torture capital for thousands, tens of thousands of Syrians who were tortured by the Assad regime, many of whom have passed. Families are looking for their loved ones. They cannot find the remains. That story will go on for a long time. It's a very sad and tragic story, but that era of the torture machine that the Syrian regime engaged in is finally over.
you've been listening to Arab Talk on KPO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we'll talk to you next week.
We'll see you next week.